So I'm going to start with a concept. And the concept leads to a light bulb moment. And in essence, the concept's not my own concept, but a very well recognized concept is language that we use helps shape our reality. The language that we use profoundly shapes what we see and what we don't see. It profoundly shapes the problems that we solve, or the problems that we ignore, shapes the data we collect, and in the end, the language we use shapes our world. So in the end, what kind of world are you shaping? So I'm going to start off by just having a look at this picture. And importantly, what you see. Any volunteers? Yeah? What do you see? An animal. Okay, that's a start. Do you see a deer crossing a road? A deer blocking the traffic? Or a road crossing a forest? So, by definition, by describing what you see, you are making choices. So things are not always what they seem. Oops. The deer, maybe it wasn't crossing the road, maybe it was standing there, startled by a car. Or maybe the road was crossing the forest, impeding the deer on its path. Both statements are valid. But the choices you make and what language you use defines your reality. So it defines the problem that you actually end up tackling and the solutions that you think about. So why am I talking about forests, and in particular in the context of light bulb moments? So for those who know me, and there are a couple, you'll know my happy place is outside. It's on the run, it's on the bike, it's not in the pool. But it's where I go to solve problems, and it's where I go to look for light bulbs. So part of my journey in starting a business was I looked at a different type of forest. I looked at the urban forest, looked at our cities and our streets, and I started to look at that picture and started to understand, intrinsically challenge my understanding of problems that we are looking to solve. Okay, so in this picture, kids crossing a street. It could be a road impeding kids in their playground. It could be teachers marshalling kids to be as safe and secure because obviously they're in a danger zone. There's different ways of contextualizing and looking at what's happening in our own urban forests. But the way to start and to question and to challenge my own reality, you've got to go back to the beginning. So this picture is 100 years ago, 1920s. I think it probably could have been a street in New York. So this is what streets look like. Okay? Streets at the time were defined as the remaining spaces between buildings. They had many purposes. People went to trade, they communed, they socialized, they met, children were playing, and people moved. And I stress the word people moved. But this changed almost immediately after that picture was taken, about 100 years ago. And what was the invention that made that change? That was the trigger behind that change. It wasn't the invention of the car, it was the invention of the mass-produced car. So suddenly cars were introduced into this space. Cars, the velocity and number of cars, the size of cars, the speed of cars, and the use of cars. And this collided head-on with the use of our streets. So immediately after the innovation and the invention, language and perceptions started to change. Streets were no longer the spaces between buildings. We're connecting people, neighbors, traders. They were reclassified as part of a much larger machine that focused on efficiency, how to shuttle vehicles as efficiently as possible from point A to point B. The language started to change, became the foundation of urban design, became the foundation of traffic engineering, then into laws, then into regulations, then into behavior. So why is this significant? It's significant because cars and car manufacturers became the champions. Roads needed to be widened. More cars came onto the roads. Roads were lengthened and widened again. Spaces between our buildings changed. And that space then became a barrier to networking, connecting, people, playing, meeting, trading. Networks that were meant to connect disconnected communities. So I just want to swing it back, and I think that's, Darren, if I could use all your graphs leading up to this particular slide, I think that's really the essence of the perception and the question that we're asking. In the previous session, we spoke about technology and the enhancement of technology and the role that technology has to play in addressing climate change, addressing what is the most meaningful challenge of our time. We also look at our current transport patterns today, and this was in 1970, and I'll tell you where this was in a second, but this was a 1970s picture of a road. So the story is quite similar today. Congested the roads, how disconnected sides A and side B of the street, how disenfranchised communities and people from their urban spaces. What we're looking at when we look at the picture like this is it is not sustainable. We spoke about energy and its role in climate change. Transport is the second largest generator of emissions in Australia and globally. It is the fastest growing emissions factor in Australia. There is a sustainability issue. It's also there's a health consequence in terms of how we move. There's a safety consequence in how we move. It accounts for 1/3 of households' carbon emissions. So in your household, 1/3 of your emissions are generated by how you move. But why is the car still the hero of our story? So is it time to reframe how we look at how we move? What are the alternate modes of transport? So that how we reframe the role of cars in movement, how we reframe our use and perspective of roads, of spaces, of the spaces between our buildings, how we reclaim our roads as spaces for people and movement, not necessarily the vehicle, the car. So language has a major role to play in challenging this. The way, our attitudes to movements are so embedded in terms of how we move from point A to point B. In Sydney alone, 2 million trips per day are under 2 kilometres, and that's taken by a car. In Melbourne, half of all trips in total are under 4.7 kilometres. Our framing in terms of how we move is fundamentally a behaviour. It's a demand-side behaviour that our language needs to change and needs to adjust. So the reason I brought this picture up is because that was Amsterdam in 1970. Now, Amsterdam in 1970 identified the issue and the problem, reframed the language into engineering, into its traffic ordinances, into its laws, into its regulations, and finally into behaviour. So 50 years down the line, this is how you experience Amsterdam today. Now, this was all about a conscious decision to intervene with how we perceive our use of our roads, which started on the engineering side, which started into the laws and the regulations, and effectively became part of your everyday behaviour. In Amsterdam, riding a bicycle is a measure of the quality of living. In Amsterdam, in Netherlands, 26% of all trips are by bicycle. In Australia, 1%. In the Netherlands, and this is standard across most European countries, at a minimum 20% of budget is allocated towards infrastructure that's active. In Australia, 0.5%. This is all about how we reframe our language, how we translate that language and that perception into the way we see our cities, the way we see our space, and then the way we change the focus on the hero of our space to people, to movement, to our children. So I implore you all to come onto a journey of reclaiming your cities. We're all tackling and facing this big mammoth task of tackling emissions, climate. These are the opportunities that you guys have to play, that you have a choice to actually be part of the solution, not necessarily part of the problem. Technology will solve a lot of the challenges that we have in front of us. But it was go back, unfortunately, I'm going to miss half the room here. Field of Dreams, the movie from our time. The famous line was, if you build it, they will come. Very true, but if you come, they will build it. So the fact is that how we change our language, how we change our perceptions and use of the roads, of how we move, what type of movement we want to do, how healthy, how enduring, that is within our hands, and that will help support Darren's role in the arena as well. So thank you.